It is 6 o'clock, and I'll call to order the Tipton Community School Board special meeting for June 30th. We're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance and repeating our vision statement. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And our vision statement: growing empowered, future-ready students who are prepared for a lifetime of opportunity and success. All right. Thank you all for taking time out of what we know are extremely busy schedules. The purpose of the special meeting tonight is to consider a resolution proposing an operating referendum tax levy and placing the corresponding public question before the voters of the Tipton Community School Corporation. We're going to have a presentation by Mr. Jaworski, our superintendent. That will be followed by some responses from the board, answering questions that came out of the community forum that we had. So we do want to address those publicly because we did not address them that evening. And then there'll be, nobody signed up for public comment? Okay. And then we'll have the consideration of the operating referendum tax levy resolution, which I will read in its entirety to everybody, and then it will be available shortly, I believe, on the website as well. So that's kind of our agenda. All right, Mr. Jaworski,
Thank you.
It's all yours.
I appreciate it. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Tonight, I'm going to walk through the proposed operating referendum that's before the board for consideration. To be clear, the board is not voting to raise taxes tonight. The board is considering whether to place a public question on the ballot this November. If the board approves the resolution tonight, the voters of the Tipton Community School Corporation District will make the final decision on November 3rd, 2026. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to explain why the board is considering this step, what the proposed operating referendum would support, and what the estimated impact would be for taxpayers. At the center of this conversation is student impact. The question is whether our community wants to provide additional local operating funding to help maintain the programs, services, staffing, transportation, and student opportunities currently provided by TCSC. Again, tonight's board action would simply give the community the opportunity to vote on that question. I'm going to walk through a few main points tonight. First, I'll explain the financial pressures that have brought us to this point, including the impact of Senate Enrolled Act 1. Then I'll talk about what we've already done to reduce expenses and operate more efficiently. After that, I'll explain our two paths forward, including the proposed referendum ballot language, spending plan, and estimated impact on taxpayers. Finally, I'll share how this compares with other school districts and what the next steps would be. Apologies for the small print here, but I feel like it's only fair to make this available for everybody to review later. The major factor driving tonight's conversation is Senate Enrolled Act 1, which was passed by the Indiana General Assembly in 2025. The intent of SCA 1 was to provide property tax relief for property owners, especially homeowners and farmers. There are several elements to this. First, SCA 1 increases the supplemental homestead deduction over the next 5 years. That means the net assessed value, or the value your home property is ultimately taxed on, is getting reduced. Second, it adds a supplemental homestead credit of 10% up to $300 for qualifying homesteads. That's money taken off the top of your tax bill. Third, it creates a new deduction for property in the 2% tax cap class, which includes farmland and rental properties. This class will experience deductions increasing from 0 to 33% by 2031. Fourth, the business personal property tax exemption threshold is going to increase from $80,000 to $2 million, beginning with the 2026 assessment. Large equipment that used to be taxable may now be tax exempt. All of those changes provide property tax relief, but they also reduce the tax base used to fund local services, including school operations. For TCSC, the challenge is that these reductions directly affect things like transportation, utilities, insurance, custodial services, maintenance, and other day-to-day costs of running the school corporation. SCA 1 creates a significant drop in our operating revenue at the same time our costs continue to rise. That's the financial problem we're trying to address tonight. Here's a visual representation of those tax deductions and credits on the net assessed value through 2034. For the past 10 years, our district's taxable value has grown by an average of 4% each year. That steady taxable value has been a key source of funding for daily operations. However, next year, the bottom falls out. Taxable value is projected to drop by over 7% in 2027, with additional drops continuing through 2031. That means we have significantly less funding to pay for essential services. This graph outlines the practical impacts of SCA1. The line on top is the gross assessed property value of Tipton. The green is what the net assessed value would be without SCA1, and that purple line is the net assessed value with SCA1. Again, net assessed value is the taxable value after deductions. It's the value used to calculate your property tax revenue for local units of government. As you can see, even though gross assessed value continues to increase, Senate Enrolled Act 1 deductions will reduce the taxable value available for local government funding over the next 5 years. That's what SCA 1 was designed to do by our state lawmakers. For a school corporation, the only way to generate additional dollars to close that funding gap requires voter approval through a referendum. That's why this resolution is before the board tonight. If approved, it would give voters the opportunity to decide whether to provide additional funds to help offset that revenue loss gap created by SCA 1. This is what happens if we don't respond to these financial pressures we're facing. The projected impact of SCA 1 has served as an accelerant, forcing us to take action now. Otherwise, our combined education operations fund cash balance is projected to be depleted by 2028. That includes the use of our rainy day fund as well. The rainy day fund is just one-time money. It can help with the short-term problem, but it doesn't fix a recurring revenue like this. The purpose of showing this slide is to be honest and transparent about our finances. If we wait until the cash is gone, our options become a lot more limited, and we run the risk of increased state oversight and corrective actions. That's why we believe it's important to address this now, while the local leaders and local voters still have the ability to decide our path forward. It's also important to understand that we haven't been standing still. We've been reducing expenses for several years. Since 2020, TCSC has reduced 52 positions. That includes reductions through attrition, reorganizing duties, combining roles, and making difficult decisions when necessary. This referendum isn't being proposed in place of responsible budgeting. We've already been reducing costs and will need to continue managing expenses carefully even with a referendum. This table represents the specific staff reductions that have already happened. Again, since 2020, we've reduced 22 teaching positions, 3 administrative positions, 19 paraeducator positions, and additional positions in transportation and operations. Those reductions have helped control expenses, but all reductions have consequences. The question isn't whether we can reduce expenses. We've done that and will continue to do that responsibly. The real question is how much more can we reduce before our schools begin to change in ways our community may not want. If funding continues to decline and costs continue to rise, one option is even more reductions. That would mean looking carefully at every program, position, and service beyond the minimum requirements needed to operate the school district and graduate students. That could include elective and rotation courses at each building, such as art, music, physical education, STEM, agriculture, family and consumer science, business, and other course offerings. It could include student supports like our paraprofessionals, transportation services, custodial services, or a dedicated school resource officer. It could include extracurricular programs, athletic teams, music programs, clubs, and stipend positions. It could also include additional administrative reductions, which would affect supervision, communication, student discipline, staff support, and responsiveness to families. To be clear, no specific reduction decision has been made at this time, but if additional revenue is not available, the district will need to bring forward a reduction plan that keeps the school corporation financially stable. I want to be direct about this without overstating it because the consequences here are real. Reductions of this size aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They'd affect students, families, and staff across our entire district. Again, no final decisions have been made at this point, but these are the types of reductions that we would be facing. Alternatively, we could opt for an operating referendum. If the board approves the resolution tonight, the community would vote in November on whether to approve additional local funding. If voters approve it, the referendum would help maintain the programs and services we currently provide. while still allowing the district to make reasonable, manageable adjustments as our enrollment changes. A referendum doesn't mean we stop being careful with spending. It means the district has a more stable local funding source to help preserve the school experience our community has come to expect. Let's look at the proposed ballot question step by step here. So in plain language, the proposal asks voters whether TCSC should receive additional operating funding for no more than 8 years. Those dollars would be used to maintain academic programs, class sizes, student supports, health and safety services, attract and retain teachers and support staff, maintain student transportation services, and sustain educational and operational funding stability. But there are two important limits built into this proposal. First, the tax rate would not exceed 25 cents per $100 of net assessed value. Second, the total amount collected would not exceed $2 million in any single year. For the required median residence value shown in the ballot language, the estimated impact would be $216 per year, or just $18 per month. It's important to understand that these are maximums. The district can't collect more than the amount approved by voters, and the actual rate could be lower. Based on our current projections, we don't expect to need the maximum rate every year. If assessed values change, if legislation changes, or if the district's financial needs change, the board can certify a lower levy and rate while staying within voter-approved limits. So where will that money go? On the screen here is going to be our proposed spending plan for these referendum dollars. The largest portion, 62%, would support student academic programs and services. That includes things like maintaining class sizes, student supports, health and safety services, extracurricular activities, supplies, and equipment. Another 24% would support the retention, recruitment, and compensation of teachers and support staff. Under the current plan, the referendum would help provide competitive compensation increases for teachers and support staff. Again, together, that's 86% of our proposed referendum revenue would go towards maintaining student programs and supporting the people who serve our students daily. The transportation portion is just 4%, or about $75,000. That would allow us to remove that $5 per student per trip transportation fee currently planned for our extracurricular and field trip transportation this school year. The remaining 10% would support operating stability and contingency needs, including inflationary pressures, cost increases, and future operational needs. So this isn't about just adding money to our budget. It's about maintaining the people, programs, and services that directly affect students. So what's the impact to our taxpayers then? Like I said before, for a household with an assessed value of $200,000, the maximum impact would be an additional $216 per year, or $18 per month. It is worth noting that state law requires the median residence value in the ballot language to be rounded up to the next $50,000. And for our district, that's $200,000, which is well above the auditor certified median. A better estimate of the actual median homestead value is $180,600, which would have a maximum estimated amount of $190 per year, or about $1,582 per month. Again, these are just estimates, and actual tax bills can obviously vary by property. I also want to reiterate that this represents just the maximum impact shown in the ballot language. It assumes the maximum voter-approved amount is levied at the maximum rate. The board, again, will have the authority to certify less than the amount, the full amount, or if the rate needed to generate that approved levy is lower. And we're not alone in this request. In fact, 1 in every 5 school districts across the state already has an operating referendum in place. The most referendums placed on a ballot in any single election before this year was just 12. This year, we anticipate more than 40 school districts to run an operating referendum, several of which are adding to their current referendum. Across Indiana, school districts are looking at operating referendum because of the same financial pressures that we're experiencing locally. Reduced local revenue, rising costs, and Senate Enrolled Act 1. This isn't just a Tipton problem, this is a statewide issue. This slide shows several districts that have passed operating referendum resolutions, along with their enrollment, proposed maximum rate, and proposed maximum levy. Among the confirmed requests we reviewed, Tipton's proposed maximum rate is actually one of the lowest. As you can see, some districts are asking for rates much higher than what's being proposed here tonight. For TCSC, this proposal isn't designed to build a large new program, create a major expansion, or allocate funds for construction. It's designed to maintain programs and services we already have while stabilizing the district's operating budget. That's why tonight's resolution is important. It gives voters the opportunity to decide whether to provide the required additional local operating funding or whether the district will need to make significant reductions to remain financially stable. So what's next? If the board doesn't approve the resolution tonight, then the administration will begin developing the comprehensive reduction plan necessary to keep the district financially stable under the current projected revenue. If the board does approve the resolution, the public question will get reviewed and approved by the Department of Local Government and Finance before ultimately being added to our ballot this November. Between now and then, the district would continue to provide factual information so residents can understand the proposal, ask questions, review the numbers, and make an informed decision. Finally, Tuesday, November 3rd is Election Day. If the referendum does pass on Election Day, the district would begin receiving referendum revenue in 2027, with those dollars supporting expenses beginning with the 27-28 school year. Again, tonight's conversation is about transparency, financial planning, and giving the community the opportunity to decide. The board's decision tonight is whether to place that question on the ballot in November. The community's decision in November is whether to approve the proposed operating referendum. If anyone has any questions or would like to discuss the facts and details of school finance or this referendum proposal, you're welcome to contact me via email or give me a call at my office. This can be a complex process, and I want everyone to have a firm understanding of what's being asked and why. And that brings us to our questions from the board tonight.
Very good. Thank you, Scott. So we had a public meeting here in the auditorium. Some conversation with the community took place in the cafeteria afterwards, collected a lot of questions from the community, and they kind of fell into these three buckets. So I'm going to answer these questions that were in the three buckets. There were more than three questions. I would like the community to know that, but there was motifs that ran through it. And so what we tried to do is bundle those into these bigger buckets so that we can address those motifs. The question that came up in multiple groups is how does the community know that the district will not just simply use the maximum amount just because it can, right? Like, why wouldn't we just approve 25 cents every year and collect the maximum? And I think that's a really fair and an important question. And I don't think the community's asking if we can just collect the revenue. It's like, what are we going to do with it? How are we going to be good stewards? And so as a board, we have a responsibility to ensure that those dollars are used for the purposes that we communicate to the public. We should expect, the community should expect regular public reporting, as we always do, annual review of the referendum revenue and our spending, and continued discussions about whether the levy being collected matches the actual needs of the district. What we have also suggested as a board is establishing an advisory committee made up of members of the community, agricultural, business leaders, people like that, that could come in and help us budget for the next year, so that the community would have a sense of understanding that it's not us putting the budget together and saying we need these things, but independent members of the community coming in to understand where these dollars are going. So if it is 25%, it's not for a company car or something, and if it's for 23 cents, that it's exactly what we needed, right? So this idea of putting this advisory committee together, asking the public for their help, it is your money, so you should have a point or a representation in that. But the goal is to avoid just this sensation that we could run it to the max every year. And so we want to alleviate that. So there were a lot of questions around that. The second question motif was, how should the board weigh the burden on taxpayers, especially farmers, businesses, seniors, and residents that are on fixed incomes? The community forum made it clear many people support the schools, but are also concerned about all rising property taxes, the rising farmland assessments, the business impact, overall cost of living, right? So the board, we all recognize we're all taxpayers too. So we understand that a referendum would affect real households. They will affect each of our households, each of our farms, and each of our businesses. We've heard very clearly that people are concerned about their property taxes, the assessment changes, and the overall cost of living. That concern matters to us, not just as school board members, but as citizens and residents of the community. At the same time, We have to consider what happens to our students, what happens to our staff, what happens to our programs, and the long-term stability of a long-standing school district without this additional revenue. So our responsibility tonight is to weigh both of those realities before making any kind of decision. We want to be very clear and very empathetic that we understand what we're asking for, and we are you, right? We don't get exempt from this. And so we are asking ourselves and you the very same question. And then the third bucket is the referendum only about maintaining the current district, or is the board also willing to consider larger structural changes? And that kind of bucket of questions raise the issue of long-term sustainability. Lots of community members asked about, are we just maintaining the status quo? Why don't we consolidate with another school? Will you continue to look for efficiencies, or once you get the money, is it just the Wild West and that kind of thing? And the referendum discussion will not stop this board from continuing to examine long-term sustainability. You can see we have been looking every year at our expenses against our income, and we've made very hard decisions up to this point. It will help, this referendum will help protect programs and services in the short term, but it does not eliminate the need for longer-term sustainable thinking and planning. The board should be willing to look at all responsible options, including reorganization of our buildings, consolidation with other school corporations. All those things will continue to be on our radar. Even with the successful passing of a referendum, we have a fiduciary responsibility to continue to wring out expenses and look for efficiencies across the county wherever is applicable. So those were the three large buckets of questions. So we will have an advisory committee that helps the public understand and gets public input on what we're asking for on an annual basis. This is not once every 8 years. This is once a year for 8 years. The public's going to be involved. And then we will not take anything off the table as far as continuing to look at efficiencies, continuing to look at reorganizations, consolidations, things of that nature. So wanted to answer those questions. I wanted this also on the record. It's being recorded for those that couldn't be here tonight that were at the forum. So there was nobody signed up for public comment on the proposed operating referendum. So we'll move right away to the consideration of the operating referendum tax levy resolution. The proposed resolution would authorize the Tipton Community School Corporation to place an operating referendum question before the voters at the November 26th election. The proposed referendum would be for a period of no more than 8 years and would establish a maximum property tax rate of 25 cents per $100 of net assessed value. The referendum is estimated to generate no more than $2 million annually. The proposed revenue spending plan identifies the following estimated annual uses of the referendum revenue: $1,233,000 for maintaining academic programs and student support services, $481,000 for attracting and retaining teachers and support staff, $75,000 for maintaining student transportation services, and the remaining $211,000 for sustaining educational and operational stability. These amounts total an estimated $2 million annually. The amounts are based on current projections and may vary depending on the actual revenue received and the educational and operational needs of the school corporation. The proposed public question states, shall the Tipton Community School Corporation increase property taxes paid to the school corporation for no more than 8 years for the purpose of providing funding to maintain academic programs, class sizes, student support, health and safety services, attract and retain teachers and support staff, maintain student transportation services, and sustain educational and operational funding stability by imposing a property tax rate that does not exceed $2.25 and results in a maximum annual amount that does not exceed $2 million. If this operating referendum public question is approved by the voters for a median residence of $200,000, the property's annual property tax bill would increase by $216 per year. The Tipton County Auditor has certified that the school corporation's median household assessed value, rounded as required by law, is $200,000, and that the estimated annual property tax increase for that median residence would be $216 at the proposed maximum rate. Adoption of this resolution would not itself approve the referendum or impose the tax. It would place the question before the voters, who would make the final decision at the November 26th election. At this time, I would entertain a motion regarding the operating referendum tax levy resolution.
I move to approve the proposed resolution that would authorize Tipton Community School Corporation to place an operating referendum question before the voters at the November 2026 election.
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second for the resolution. Any board comment? All right, hearing none, I have a motion and a second to approve the referendum resolution to be placed on the ballot. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. I would also entertain a motion to adjourn our special meeting.
I move to adjourn the special meeting.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you all for coming out.